In this art ritual video, I'm going to do some of those ugly, awkward, but super necessary drawings that we need to do in order to get an idea from our head down onto the page. Often before we even begin designing something and coming up with something that works, there is that initial phase where you're just trying to sort things out, and the drawings there are often a mess, but they're really, really important to the design process. So I thought in this casual hangout draw with me session, I try and tackle that. So often when we see design tutorials, things are a little bit staged, they're a little bit canned, but what I wanted to do is hit record and show you kind of how my brain processes that initial phase. In this case, we're going to be designing some Dwarven familiars, and the inspiration for this is really simple. I drew one of these and I thought it was kind of lame. So I thought, hey, let's try and make that much better, see if we can add some design, really think this through, and see what comes out the other end. But before we do that, let's check out this book, The Art of Paul Bonner, because I think Paul Bonner is an amazing, amazing creature designer. And I quite frankly wanted to check this out to get a little bit inspired when it comes to creating really, really interesting, unique designs that have a sense of anatomy and caricature and exaggeration all in one. As usual for a drawing codex video, and especially an art ritual video, this is not going to be fast-paced nor heavily edited. This is just a real-time draw with me hangout session. We're just gonna talk about art. You're gonna see me awkwardly go through the process of drawing a whole bunch of ugly drawings in the beginning, and yeah, that's it. So hopefully that sounds interesting. Hopefully you'll join me. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Check out my free brainstorming toolkit. I've taken the same tools and frameworks that I use every day and created a workshop on world building, ideation, and brainstorming. In it, you'll learn things like how to quiet the editing mind, how to enhance your blue sky brainstorming ability, and how to use brainstorming anchors for things like story or even your pre-existing ideas and proclivities as an artist. This is a free training. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So if that is something you're interested in, go check it out. The link will be in the description. Okay, let's check out this book, The Art of Paul Bonner. Now, one of the reasons that I felt like sort of looking at this book is I feel like he does such a great job at creating really unique takes on a lot of typical fantasy tropes. And if you're not aware, Paul Bonner is an artist who has done a lot of work for the sort of RPG industry, creating a lot of covers and illustrations for a variety of things, for trading cards and just a lot of sort of RPG style work. And I think it's just such a great mix of real character, great anatomy, really solid foundation, and just does this thing that I feel like is so rare these days, where we really do combine realism, realistic painting, and a great level of craft with a real sense of caricature and exaggeration, and also some serious design. So one of the things I always really like about looking at Paul Bonner's work is the degree to which these things really do feel as if they're three-dimensionally plausible. And also that, all these details are kind of figured out. Like if you look at like the tongue of this guy, see if I can get it on on here, you can kind of really see, right? Like that, it kind of really feels like something's going on there, right? And I feel like so many different elements of this are really nicely sorted, right? You can really see the level of detail and fidelity. And this is something that I always kind of aspire to with my own work, right? But it doesn't necessarily come naturally to me. So I feel like it's just a great example of someone who is actually kind of figuring out on an anatomical level some unique forms and ideas, and someone who's able to combine that with actual character. Right? It's not just anatomy and structure and painting, but that all these characters feel as if they are alive and they are interesting and that they're genuinely little characters. And also just the ability to combine that with these epic scenes. it's just always been really, really inspiring. So one of the things that I obviously am always trying to do as someone who's mainly employed as a concept designer is like design things that I guess embody this mix of having unique shapes, unique character, unique ideas, and also we do frequently have to figure out like how would that thing actually function. I think Paul Bonner does a great job at really kind of sorting a lot of these things out. Great pencil drawings, great ability to put these things into actual illustrations. There's always an interesting little narrative, right, where you kind of can look at so many different elements of the painting and you're really going to constantly find something there, right? See if we can zoom up again, right? Here. So if you kind of look at the main action, right, there's like character there, there's kind of character here, but there's also like a lot of little characters, right, like in the background here. There's always like little bits and pieces going on, and I feel like that's such an important thing to kind of remember, is that will kind of draw you in. So I feel like you can kind of always look at one of these Paul Bonner illustrations for ages, because there's always something in the periphery. There's always something in the secondary, the tertiary reads. Everything is kind of filled with character and interest. And yeah, I've always just been really amazed at the uniqueness of some of his kind of ogre designs. They've always been really inspiring. And this is not easy. Like, I always find this stuff to be really challenging, to get that mix of kind of like character, exaggeration, emotion, structure, rendering, and to be able to put it all together into these big illustrations is super, super impressive. Yeah, just really cool. And again, I feel like also leaning into, there's often that feeling of like hyper detail where there's so much stuff going on here, you're kind of not quite sure how to, like, where to look or what's going on, but it always rewards you when you actually do look and try and figure out what's going on. So many cool little designs you can see here, all the different little details, like all these guys have been figured out. This is a really interesting take on these big kind of orky characters. Yeah. Great lighting. And yeah, just like, I feel like this is such a rare thing. It's worth repeating, because I feel like this is so often something that, like, when we're dealing with concept art and illustration these days, that being able to get that feeling and that emotion in there in terms of expressions often gets left a little bit, especially when people are using so much kind of like 3D and we're just kind of trying to, hack our way to a finish, that you really kind of miss this ability to make these, like, these faces here are just like so expressive, and you really see the benefit of kind of leaning into that kind of drawing heavy approach. Yeah, but again, there's a very particular aesthetic here that I think is just so interesting, where and this is one of these tricky things where putting so much detail in there and having all these little stories where, like, every little character, like, there's a whole character here that's fully drawn out and fully realized, but they're kind of hidden. And as you sort of go up again, there's always little business going on, always in the details here, just so much nuance, right? And I feel like that's just something that is, yeah, it's often missing, right? Because we often just kind of futz all those details. It's kind of not so important, but yeah, it always just kind of reminds you like how cool that is when everywhere you look in the image, there's sort of detail, and you can just kind of sit there and sort of drink it in. It's what I always used to, and that's often was my experience of like looking at a lot of these illustrations is, when I was a kid and this would be on some cover of some magazine, you kind of stare at it for like hours because there just wasn't that much other stuff to look at. And when something really was well sorted like this, it was just so fun to look at. But yeah, huge mix of different kind of styles of illustration. I really like the, again, mix of caricature and realism that he sort of has going on with a lot of the human characters. Always these really interesting crazy designs that, again, I feel like often are a little bit underappreciated. Would have been cool to see, again, like a Paul Bonner video game. I hope that will happen at some point, right? Because you can imagine, like, now, again, with the technology we have, you could really bring these things to life, you know, with that sort of level of rendering, but also that level of character and emotion. I just think that would be sort of really cool if someone could kind of realize that. But yeah, and just the weird mix of like psychedelic color, really detailed anatomy. It's kind of weird, like aliens, dinosaurs. Yeah, and always a huge amount of emotion. So yeah, I've always really looked up to Paul Bonner and the particular mix of stuff that he kind of provides, and always thought those designs were really, really aspirational. Just that ability to kind of create all those things. So again, he does like everything really, really well. Everything I really like about art. And again, these weird things. How weird is that? Again, that's what I always just like about weird fantasy art. Is just seeing things that are so weird and trippy that, yeah, just kind of takes you to a complete other space. Let's jump in and do some sketching. I do want to reiterate that this kind of part of the process can be a little bit awkward and ugly, and really what we're doing here is thinking through the design process and the drawing process. And often it's easy to kind of say, as I guess a teacher, like, hey, it's okay, sometimes you got to blow past those kind of ugly, awkward drawings and see what kind of happens, right? So much of this is like mining for gold. And the reality is, though, that often when you're stuck in that early process as a designer, it can feel as if like, this is not working. Like, I am not getting this. This all sucks. Like, I hate it. Get me out of here. I don't want to do this anymore. And I think it's just important to trust the process a little bit and keep going and kind of see what happens, especially when we consider a design process where often what we're trying to do here is collect a bunch of ideas, use a mix of thinking. And what you kind of see with this sort of process is like, I do some thinking and then I kind of abandon the thinking. And then I'm like, what would look cool? And then we kind of just sort of cycle. And it's so important to get into that frame of mind of like having something to start with, seeing where it goes. And then when you kind of find something that's more interesting, or maybe that doesn't work, to just kind of abandon it. Again, we're getting into that brainstorming flow. Now, if you want to check out a little bit more brainstorming stuff, again, check out the brainstorming workshop that I kind of mentioned right in the beginning. That's got some great tips on kind of how you can think your way through this. But again, this is just a bit of a rough, ugly process, but it's often where we kind of blow through those initial ideas, try and get what's in our mind, like down onto the page. And once you kind of have that, that's that traction. Where like we do that first pass. And again, I'll follow this up with another session where we'll do in Photoshop. I'll kind of color some of these up and sort of present them. And we'll kind of look at how often, again, we do a whole bunch of ugly, awkward drawings, and then you kind of select a few of them, you kind of put it in a nice presentation, and like, yeah, you'd be surprised what happens after we get through a lot of this awkward mess in the beginning. Okay, let's start with some sketching. Now, a big reason why I wanted to do this session is that I created this illustration a while ago as one of these kind of little personal pieces, and I just wasn't happy with this little creature. Now, part of this is because I hadn't really thought about this that much. So what I want to do in this session is talk about some of the preliminary design style ideation things that we can do to maybe jog loose a couple of more interesting ideas about what could be here. The idea is obviously this is kind of what a animal familiar would be if a dwarf had it. So what would your dog or cat or animal companion be for a dwarf? And I kind of went with this weird kind of reptile thing, right? And I'm like, I don't think it's the worst idea. I kind of had an idea in my mind about what it was going to be. But, you know, ultimately, this is one of these things where I kind of realized I needed to go a lot deeper here to really come up with something that was kind of interesting. So that's what I thought I would do in this session, is think about a dwarven familiar, an animal or creature companion, what that type of animal or creature companion would be, and just do some sort of initial design drawings of it. So that's what we have got planned. Now, normally when I'm doing this, it's really just a pretty basic process of sketching. So we've got a sketchbook here. Tools for today are a Strathmore 400 series drawing hardbound sketchbook. I have a matte Blackwing that has an eraser on it, and we're just gonna have a go and see what happens. But first, often before we even do drawing, it's really good to look at and consider, what are we doing? Like, how do we sort of come across? Now, this is where, again, you sort of start to think about this. And like, if you were to kind of ask AI about what a Dwarven familiar would be, right? So we kind of have our prototypical dwarf, right? See if I can sort of zoom up a little bit. You know, say we're sort of drawing dwarves, and we've done this quite a bit on the channel. It's always a fun kind of topic. But, you know, you kind of have your prototypical Dwarven beard character thing. And this is your, you know, I guess Tolkien-esque, or I'm not quite sure where the mythology of the Dwarven people really comes from, or what that's all about. But, all right, we've got our prototypical Dwarven mythology. And part of that is that they live right underground. Now, I guess part of what you could do is sort of think, well, let's challenge that. But I think often if you kind of went to ask AI, like what would we sort of expect as a little familiar or creature, they often talk about the fact that these dwarves have these kind of giant forges, right? As part of the Lord of the Rings mythology, that's certainly kind of part of it. That dwarves have these hot lava-filled forges that they kind of spend a lot of time in. And so often a lot of the iconography around them would be that this is hot. So if we did have a little kind of creature of some kind that, right, say like some sort of little lizard creature, which is kind of what I was thinking about, right? Some kind of little cute creature for them to kind of hang around. Like, what would be the purpose of this? What would be the utility of it? And I think I was sort of just going with this sort of reptilian idea before. We were just thinking about, you know, what would fit? Something a bit like a sort of a dragon, a lizard, a dog, something like that. But often, in this instance, we're kind of imagining they would want something warm, right? That's often what dwarves are kind of all about. They're about sort of fire and lava and sort of smelting things. And I think the reality, though, is that sort of if you think about, you know, at the middle of a mountain, right, where often we kind of have our dwarven cities and things, is that actually it'd be pretty warm down there. So I think I really was interested in exploring some of the temperature differentiation, and also the fact that it would be dark, right? So if we think about underground, we have things that are dark, and it's going to be hot, right? Like once you get down there and you're mining for rare earth minerals of some type or another, you know, you got to be pretty far down there. Now, again, depends where the mountain is. Sometimes it can be cold, but often you have that geothermal heat. So I was thinking, like, actually, often when you're thinking about, right, this is like a tool or utility of your kind of animal familiars, or the way that people often co-opt creatures to help them, is you might actually want something that was cold. Right, so instead of it being us aligning with the kind of heat, warmth of one of these kind of dwarven symbolic, I guess, sort of, what would you call it? It's kind of like an elemental alignment. Is that actually they would probably need something as like air conditioning, right? Like something down there to make sure that they can stay cool, right? Because it's going to get really, really hot, right, in the middle of that kind of mountain. So that's kind of where I was thinking, is like, okay, maybe we need to think of something different versus like a fire drake or some kind of like fire lizard or something like that to keep them warm. But also, if you sort of think about the logic of what that would mean, is you would be adapted as a dwarf to living in these kind of really hot environments, right? So if you ever did go up onto the land, it would be very cold, and they wouldn't be very adapted to that particular type of environment. So maybe you would need something to kind of keep you warm up above. And so maybe it would be a matter of like when they're deep in the middle of nowhere, mining some rare earth mineral or smelting something, working at the forge in the middle of some mountain, that's where you would need to keep things cool. And maybe you would need some elemental animal familiar or something to kind of make sure that you keep everyone sort of cool. But if you went above ground, you'd be so adapted to heat that you might need something that actually did kind of keep you warm all the time. So that's the kind of nonsense that I would sort of think about as I'm sort of drawing and sitting there thinking about like, what kind of creature would there be? And it's always good when we're designing to have some sort of sense of this. And also it would be sort of dark. So maybe we could think about some ways for creatures to kind of help cool the dwarf down and also sort of light things up, right? So maybe it might be something like this, some sort of creature, but maybe it would be cool, right? Maybe it would be like an iced mythological creature of some kind, right? And also, you know, would it be something that they're adapting to actually sort of carry on their body or carry a sort of part of them, right, to sort of make sure they keep them warm? Like, where would this creature come from? Where would it sort of be? And also that, you know, maybe this creature would be extremely sort of uncomfortable being in a really hot sort of under the mountain. So again, it brings up a lot of sort of creatures and ideas and things that we could sort of think of. So that's kind of, I guess, where I would sort of start thinking about how we might sort of design one of these creatures or do something like that. Now, I like the idea of some type of little creature. And this is where we'd start playing around with different silhouettes or shapes. So as a design pass, it's good to kind of think about that really kind of rough stage, right? So you could think of this as being something like the inverse of a fire drake or something like that. Something that is inherently very kind of chunky, but also cold, right? Something very sort of compact. And again, it also brings up that idea of like sort of from a visual language, right? Do we align, right, with the element, right? Or do we oppose? Because if you think about something, you know, that would be aligning with the idea of cold or ice, you could certainly have something that would be like a little boom. Or if we think about like also what would be fun and look cool with a dwarf. So if we think about our dwarf being here, boom. Right? Like, would it be fun for them to have some kind of elemental ice lizard or something like that? That's kind of part of their get up, right? Right, like that might be fun, is you just kind of carry one of these things around And deep underground, it kind of keeps you cool. Maybe it could also light the way, right? So we sort of have something there that could also be light emitting. Or you could think of other things that could be kind of light emitting, right? That might kind of work, right? You could sort of think of this as, yeah, you know, maybe we could make it some sort of little, right? Some sort of little lizardy thing, right? Almost like a salamandery crocodile. Boom. Right, have a big sort of chunky tail. So none of these drawings are terribly good. We haven't got to the good drawing stage, right? But like maybe it could be something like that. Again, similar to what I sort of had with some kind of tusks or something. Or it could just be a little bit more like an insect, right? Because again, what lives underground is insects. So we could think about there being, right, some kind of, and this would work for it being light, right? Probably not for it being sort of cold, but right, maybe you have some sort of little sort of grub or something. Right, a little insect. Like, would that be fun? Would that be interesting? Again, you could sort of put it on a, could kind of put it on a staff or something like that. Little bug guy. Right, and you'd have to like carry one of those around. Again, if we look at that sort of original sort of creature that I created, I'm not entirely sure. Right, not entirely sure what the best picture for this would be, right? So again, this idea, I like the idea of it being kind of a worm of some kind. Maybe the worms also are good at kind of creating some type of coolness. Maybe you need both, right? Like maybe you need a whole bunch of different things. Yeah, let's think about doing some shape design, because I'm not entirely sold on that whole idea of there being a little lizard-like creature. And this is like, I'm not really looking at any reference. I'm not really looking at any kind of this is what it should be, or I'm not looking at anything. I'm just kind of trying to find some shapes that I find interesting. Right, just thinking about abstraction. But some kind of mole style thing. And yeah, maybe it's got, thing is, like, scales don't work in the cold. Scales really are a obviously something that works better to like collect heat, whereas you would want sort of fur or something like that. And that's where I think, again, if you did have this idea of them kind of taking some creature down there, I feel like it being sort of an elemental creature, I think is really good. So not necessarily something that's adapted to the cold, but something that is elementarily aligned with the cold, right? So this thing would just kind of sit here, right? Again, I just like the idea of it being this kind of chunky little thing, right? Like a bulldog or something. Like a big lizard. Right, kind of sits on the ground or something. Right, big head, but it's just an elemental creature of the cold. And obviously, like, the hotter it gets, right? So you kind of take it down into the mountain. And the more, like, the further down you take it, the colder it gets, right? Because it's sort of having, it's like it's sweating, right? It's trying to make itself normal, right? And if it is like normally aligned with being cold or icy or whatever, then it's going to sort of light everything up, make everything colder. So I kind of like that idea. Again, we haven't really thought about what this kind of character might be. But yeah, I'm not sure tusks work in this instance, right? So just playing around with some different proportions for feet. And again, this is kind of cartoony, right? Let's think about creating some nice shape there, right? A bit like a tadpole or something. Again, there's something about that kind of salamander axolotl thing that just makes them feel very elemental because they just don't look very functional, right? So this is kind of what I would do is, and normally at this point again, I'd also sort of go a bit subverbal, right? Because it's not always helping. Boom. To talk about it. Like, how would we think about that shape? Boom. And again, we could make it like it could be a mix of, like, what would the face be like? Because it could be something that feels kind of cute, right? We have some eyes, right? A big mouth. You could imagine it can kind of. Boom. Right, big mouth. Or it could be a little bit more weird, right? It could be that. It sort of has that. More like one of those moles, right? That sort of can't see or something like that. Again, it could be something they've sort of adapted. But again, some of those moles do have tusks, right? Maybe it could just be like something that is kind of a bit gross. Again, I always think like gross plus cute is like a good place to start. So again, this pencil needs like sharpening, right? It's not not doing a great job of adding detail, but that's often can be sort of good, right? Yeah, I kind of like it to be flat on the bottom. Boom. Big sort of tusks and could be something like this. Hard to say. Let's see if we can swap pencils here. All right. So again, there's a million sort of different ideas you could sort of play around with, right? But I think something sort of fairly compact, right? Like if you're thinking about something that would be, again, whether or not it's aligned with being underground or whether it's sort of been taken underground, it's sort of hard to tell. But I think something sort of really chunky and also a bit dwarf-like would sort of be good here. Boom. Something with some cool, fun shapes that again would sort of look. If we think about there being a character next to it or something, right? Boom. Right, how'd this look? See if we can refine this a bit more. Yeah, not pointy teeth. Boom. Alright, let's see if we can go back a bit more. Gets feeling. I feel like I really like it when we can kind of get that mix of it being cute and a little bit scary at the same time. I think that's always, but again, I feel like often you need a nose, right? Like this is where something like that would kind of help. And I'm totally out on a limb here. I'm like, I have no idea whether this is actually going to work. Something kind of beaverish might work. Getting these are all, I think they're like veering towards being terrifying. which is not quite what we want. Boom. Maybe if we can make it feel a bit more rotund, I can make it feel a bit more cute. Boom, boom. And so often what I'll do is, like, again, I'm just messing around. I'm just trying to find some ideas that kind of work, right? And once I kind of found a couple, we can sort of sketch them out. It's just looking too scary. Yeah, then we can kind of sketch them out. I'd often sort of take these into Photoshop, see if we can kind of make something out of it. The initial kind of mess, and I guess like why I like to sort of do some of these kind of ideation things, is like often when people kind of do these exercises, right, it's a little bit canned, so you sort of don't see all these kind of ugly drawings. But the reality is, like, you know, if you're trying to find something interesting and new, often it's like a whole bunch of really ugly drawings that sort of don't go anywhere. And it's only after you kind of find the ones that do that it kind of makes sense, right? Yeah, so I don't think adding a nose is going to help, right? But yeah, maybe thinking about adding some sort of texture or so I'm kind of drifting away from my initial idea, right? Of like something that is elementarily cold. But we'll see whether we can bring it back around later on. But yeah, I think the idea of having something that kind of burrows down is kind of where we want to go. Boom. Boom. I think maybe a smaller head is like a good idea. Boom. Like maybe. Yeah, like maybe something where, right, we should have a face. Like this. Boom. Boom. With some big kind of beaver teeth, right? Like maybe that would be a cool, iconic visual. And your big kind of chunky, with some big claws. And then the tail is kind of like hard to tell apart from the head, right? Yeah, don't know. Looks a little bit silly. All right. So let's think about, again, so sometimes if I'm just sort of sketching around, right, it's good to create something with a little bit more uniformity, right? Like let's think about doing some creature thumbnails, right? And let's see if we can keep the perspective pretty similar. This can often be a good way, right? If we're a bit stuck. Little guy like this. I mean, I feel like something, right, like something with that level of kind of heft and chunkiness, right, like fits the aesthetic, right? Like the idea of it being this kind of lizard bulldog thing, right, to me seems very appealing for some reason. But yeah, could certainly play around with different shapes or ideas of the same idea. Oh. Oh. Thinking if it's a bit more, again, splayed out like a lizard. Again, this is not looking at any lizard anatomy, right? It's just like boom, boom. Like how would this shape work? But yeah, not really thinking about the skeleton or anything sort of truly anatomical at this point. I mean, I feel like I kind of like that idea as a shape, right? That kind of splayed look. Some big claws. Yeah, I mean, the other sort of way you could go is for it to be some sort of really insecty kind of thing, but yeah, I'm not quite sure I want to go. I want to go down that route. Yeah, the other things we could kind of do is maybe like, oh, let's stick with that similar idea. Again, we're still kind of looking down at it. But in this case, it has like a very large tail, right? So getting a bit more like we're thinking about creating a creature, right? Less on functionality, but like how could we make it, sort of Monster Hunter-esque in terms of the way that we exaggerate the features. So maybe this is a thing where like the creature could help burrowing through rock, or help with sort of mining or something. So again, we're totally abandoning all concept of this being a cold creature here. All right, big claws to help burrow around. Yeah, I like this kind of feeling. Again, maybe it's like, maybe it is good to have, just go all in on that sort of little barrel-y kind of idea, right? Like maybe there is just a big spiky ball on top that this creature can just burrow with. So they can just smash. I like the, if we look at it from the side, right, we've got sort of spiky head here, and there's like eyes in it somewhere. Oh. I think this needs to be bigger, doesn't it? This needs to be like so much bigger. Don't. Right, and also like more, right, more like something that could actually be used to thump rock or something. Again, I feel like this is, I think I need to revisit that idea of it being sort of cold, right? Like I feel like there's something interesting there. Again, like maybe just the, you know, like that like dwarves do carry, and this again sort of makes us sort of be able to sort of break it down a little bit, right? But if we think about, right, our dwarf carrying, right, like maybe as part of, like maybe on their sort of pouch, right, like the dwarf has some little kind of fire drake or snow drake, right, like some little sort of lizardy creature, right? And when they're underground, right, it's almost like it kind of lives like in their beard, right? And this makes sure that they kind of have something to keep their core temp up or down, right? And when they go above ground, they have to take something to keep them warm. When they go into the heart of the mountain, right, they have to keep something to keep them cool. Again, it's just like stuff you could put on a dwarf that would make it mean us not being super generic and sort of boring, right? But then, yeah, like maybe, again, I like this idea, this little creature-y thing. Feels a little bit more like kind of what I wanted in the beginning. Yeah, something like that. So let's play around, see if we can like take some of these ideas and actually turn them into something. Let me just sharpen these pencils because these pencils are way too blunt now. Got one done. Two done. So this is where we kind of want to think about, like, I guess, formalizing some of these designs and just doing some quick work. And these are the ones that I would sort of scan, right? So if we sort of go back to here, this would be a little bit easier. These are the ones that I would actually sort of scan and see if I could kind of work out. So firstly would just be like, okay, can we kind of think about how this would work, right? If we kind of have a dwarf. Right, find that ground plane. Boom. Right, we have a big nose. We have that kind of beard. Right, boom. So again, this is like somewhat necessary. It's probably nothing to do with this, but I really like the idea of like just putting it in context. Even though this is super sketchy, once we add a little bit of color to it, it'll kind of come to life, right? So here we got, right, let's just keep the idea of, okay, every dwarf in this world, in this fantasy world, has a little fire drake or an ice snow drake with them. And that's just part of it, right? Boom. All right. And again, let's think about where's the center line. Boom. Right. There's the elbow. Elbow's out there. Let's project out. Right. That's where the hand is. Right. We've got some kind of axe or something here. Boom. Boom. Arm is up here. Here's the belt. Let's put this hand on the belt here. Right. Deltoid. Right. Barrel chest. Boom. Knees. Boom. Boom. Right. Again, super rough. Boom. And this might be a little bit wonky when I actually kind of look at it straight on, not doing a proper sort of drawing pass. But we'll see. I'll take this into Photoshop. Maybe I'll do a follow-up art ritual video. I'll take it into Photoshop, see if we can make it better. Right, boom. Right. Okay. So I think this is like an interesting idea. Right, we can obviously put an axe here. And again, probably could design it to be more dwarven as well. Boom, boom. Okay, it's not a bad start. Okay, and now here we have this other creature, right? His little kind of friend. So again, how would we frame it? Right, I kind of think I like the idea of it being like a spade. Right, this tail sort of comes down here. Right. Lots of bony protrusions and things coming here. Again, I like the idea of this being the eye. I'm trying to keep him like sort of fairly still fairly kind of cute. Okay, boom. Shadow. Right, shadow for this is over here. This seems very minor, but it'll probably help us a little bit. Right. Again, thick chunkiness over here. So often also, like one of the things I find is that doing a really rough drawing like this allows me to experiment a bit with the color. Right, so if we sort of keep it pretty simple, and I might do another pass if I get a minute, but honestly, half the time, just kind of keeping things sketchy like this can be super useful, because we can sort of experiment and do a number of little kind of passes on it. All right, so here we've got a hand. Boom. I feel like this. Yeah, I like that kind of, that sort of splayed bulldog look, right? You can kind of get a feel for how they would kind of walk through doing that. All right, 1, 2. So I'm just going to see if I can work with this silhouette a bit. All right, get rid of this. Okay, boom, boom. Because the danger with like a matte Blackwing is you can really go hard with this, and it can cause a lot of darkness that we don't want. So I kind of want to just make sure we're hitting the silhouette here. Right. Again, there's a few less here. And then once we get over here, right, again, let's make this a bit more, again, Monster Hunter obvious, right, video gamey. Right, really bring out a couple of these sort of spikes. And you could probably do the same here, right? We could probably really put a couple of sort of horns or something on the creature if we wanted. Right, boom, boom, boom. Try to just push that silhouette a bit more. I don't know whether this is going to work. We'll have to see. But yeah, you know, like that's a good sort of initial, right, sort of pass. Right, got some shadows here. All right, boom. So, you know, that might help us to kind of position and get an understanding of sort of how big it is. Let's see if we can do a couple of quick ideations on, you know, what this little creature could be like. And often here it's good to do, you know, just like a couple per page, right? Let's go back and check some of these initial ideas we had, right? You know, I still like this kind of basic look, the turtley look. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think something like this is kind of good. We're kind of running out of room there. Let's make sure we rough that in properly. Right, so we're going to have body here, right, and then this giant ball. And we kind of want to make sure, right, if we think about our sort of like 1, 2, 3 read, we've got this gigantic thing, right? I kind of want almost the body to be a little bit smaller. So it sort of becomes super obvious. Again, not very realistic, right? But and certainly at some point, you know, you'd want to go in there and look at like, okay, what would be a reasonable way to kind of think about patterning out these different spikes everywhere, right? Like maybe it would be better to, you know, think about there being a couple of different rungs of them, right? So again, trying to make it really sort of compact, right? I think is key. Boom. Yeah, let's see if we can lean into this. I mean, I feel like adding a bit too much structure to it often makes it feel a little bit less functional, right? That there's something really fun about this being like just these giant sort of balls, right? It makes it feel more like it's sort of power equipment or something, right? So I think again, putting a ground plane in, right? Like thinking about where that is, right, in relation to everything, quite useful, because that will really position, right, like where this thing is in relation to everything else. And again, this is all super rough, right? This is just, we're looking at 5-minute sketches here. Boom. Boom, boom. Again, I feel like this is having that, like the level of cuteness that I kind of wanted. Right. And again, the question is like, how big is it, right? Like you can imagine if this thing was like a large dog or animal or something like that. Right, if this is sort of the dwarf character. Like that would make it seem far more interesting. So what was the other kind of basic idea we sort of had, right? The other idea was, I think like the major difference was one where the whole body is a bit more like this shape. Right, boom. I'm still going to try and get that rotund nature in there. It's almost like a bit like a whale, right? Right. Boom. So here we got like a little eye, right, and all these spikes kind of going this way. Boom. Again, try and keep this side of it super chunky. Like having, again, a nice fun shape. Let's find where this shadow is. This is going to help us define what's going on. And again, I like the idea of this being, right, basically like little inversion. Boom, boom, boom. What's going on the other side? Center. Alright, boom. Shadow, shadow. Just think about indicating some like sort of rocks or something like that. Again, I feel like this shadow maybe not that well expressed. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, I feel like I'm not entirely kind of convinced this is going to be some amazing design, but I feel like that's like a good place to start, right? And again, if this was like a professional job or something like this, you know, this would be that first step where you're like, look, you know, this is the first thought. You know, what do you reckon? Is that a dumb idea, or what should we try? You know, like, what should we do? Yeah, so again, what I might do is these are like sort of super rough little kind of drawings, but what I might do in the next kind of ritual video is just see if I can scan these in, take a photo on my phone, add some color, and yeah, we'll see if we can kind of forward this design a little bit more. So again, we sort of abandoned a couple of the ideas that we sort of started with, but this is often, you know, if you sort of go back to that initial sort of drawing that I kind of started with, boom, there we are. Sort of this one, you know, you can see like I feel like this just doesn't have a lot of structure. It doesn't have a lot of anything, right? You know, it just feels very sort of dull and like it's kind of like a quadruped, but yeah. So I feel like, you know, just thinking through and being like, what would be there? You know, what do we need? Is it hot? Is it cold? Just sort of gets me thinking, and then I'm sort of trying to come up with some different ideas, right? Some more. Some of them look silly. Some of them are not working. That's okay. Again, we kind of find an idea that might work. Then like, okay, let's see if we sort of draw that out. Does that work? And, this is, we've just been sketching around for about an hour. And, scan these in, add a little bit of color next time. And we sort of got that first unit of design working. So anyway, I just thought I'd sort of do a little quick sketching session here. Let me know whether this one has been interesting or not. And other than that, yeah, tune in for the next art ritual video where we'll take this to the next stage. Thanks so much for watching. Happy drawing.